distinguish this territory from the continent of Asia. Okay? As you know that this territory is primarily significant because of the book of Revelation, but I don't believe nothing less because of the activities of Paul in this area. It is actually Paul who came as the first one, and he brought the Christianity here. So our focus now is, we don't have any information if Paul ever visited this place. And if you ask me, in my view, he probably did not come here. He did not establish the church. Okay, how did come? Evidently missionaries, maybe from other churches, Laodicea or some other places, Ephesus, they came here, and this is the way how the church was established. Why are we doing all of these things? If a pastor on the pulpit announces to the church and say, we will study the messages to the 7 churches, you know immediately what will happen. I'm sorry, I'm talking to pastors now. Okay, we read the message to the particular church, and we say, you see, this church applies, and we talk about history. We say, these are the prophecy, okay, about certain period in Christian history. That's the way how we interpret message to the 7 churches. And I'm so glad that our church, in I don't know how many last 20, 30 years, actually takes the right approach. And the right approach that we are taking now about messages to the 7 churches fit the basic biblical hermeneutics. And I'm sorry you who are in the green bus, this kind of repetition, but probably it will stick much better to our minds, okay?
All right, that's all right.
Is the basic biblical interpretation and the principle that we apply is based on this. Please, I would like to ask you a question. When you say to your church members, okay, let's see what Paul said in the letter to Romans. What do you mean? What do you mean? That there was Apostle Paul 2,000 years ago. He wrote to Christian churches. You see, I'm using plural, okay? Christian churches. Because they're not church meetings like this one when the early Christians were gathering. We talk about home churches. It means when Paul preached the gospel, I'm now focusing on Paul, okay? There are several households. They became Christians, separate households. And households could really include between 20 to 70, 80 people. Okay, the whole family could be even grandparents, parents, children, grandchildren, slaves, workers for that. They were all. So if you baptize the person, the whole household was baptized. And then naturally, the person who was in charge of that household became what? The elder, the leader of the church. That's how the word elder came into the Christian vocabulary, okay? So we are talking about Christian churches. So we say Paul wrote his letter to the Christian churches in Rome. Why did he write? Why I'm focusing on Romans? Because my commentary on Romans for New Seventh-day Adventist Bible commentary will be it's just a matter of time it will be published. So it's still stick in my mind there. Why? I'm using example because Paul wanted to preach the gospel where nobody preached. And this time he said, I know certainly nobody preached the gospel in Spain. That's what you can read in the first chapter of the book of Romans and to chapter 15. Paul wanted to go to Spain to evangelize there. But friends, if you go to such area, you depend on people who will support you with your prayers, support you financially, morally, to encourage you. If there are problems, you need some help. Okay, you need few workers. You'll go to the church and ask, can somebody come to help me? Okay, and the closest church to Spain was in Rome. Okay, So Paul wanted to have the church. But then Paul heard that the church in Rome was divided. By the way, if you read the letter to the Romans, you will always see Paul repeats constantly to the Jews first, and to the Greeks or to the Gentiles. Constantly he repeats. Why? Because for certain unforeseen circumstances, the church in Rome was really divided into two camps. And Paul knew that he wanted to have the church to support his ministry. He somehow, with the help of the Holy Spirit, must bring the Christians in Rome somehow in agreement. They have to be together. They have to respect each other. And Paul is planning to visit them. But before he visits them, he writes them a letter somehow. And what he's talking about, how God, through his grace and mercy, took us who were sinners, terrible sinners, regardless of our background, okay, and make us justified. In other words, he made us to be in right standing before him. When God did it, okay, he made all his children one great family. They cannot be divided. That's actually the main message of the book of Romans. Paul is doing that. So you see, whenever you preach from the book of Romans, before you try to understand what the text means to us today, what is the first question that you have to ask? What the text meant to the people of the time. That's the basic principle. Please, without any apology, I want to say of any New Testament book, also the Old Testament, but I'm focusing on New Testament guy, okay? I'm focusing on the New Testament. You see, we are dealing here during this trip about 7 messages that were sent to the 7 Christian communities in this area that we today call Asia. We usually take those messages automatically, assuming that Jesus gave those messages to John, to Seventh Adventists in North America. And that's how we interpret it.
That's right.
Automatically we jump from Patmos going to our 20th century or to different periods in Christian history. And we are here, and I believe that this trip will change our perspective. I believe that already just the short time that we are here is telling us about something. And that's actually, I would like just to take a few minutes to talk about this. I would like to invite you at this moment, somehow, that you forget who you are, where you are from, etc. Just imagine that you are one of the first century Christians living here in Pergamon. You did not live here. Maybe some of you who thinks that you are king of royalties would live here. But people lived there in that valley there. These were administrative buildings. Here were the temples. Here where the really life took place of significance for the city. But ordinary people, they live there. And you are one of the Christians who lived there. You want to preach to your neighbors. About whom?
Jesus.
About Savior. But you know that your neighbor is pagan. He believed in another Savior. Please, I just want that you put your in situation of those Christians. They believe about God, Savior. His name is Asclepius, and his symbol is serpent. And you have to preach to your neighbor about serpent. You know what I'm trying to say? And what the serpent represented. But to preach about the Lamb who by his blood redeemed you and saved you, and actually he is your Savior. So if you try to think about those Christians, I just want to tell you, your missionary activities would not be easy here in this city. Every morning you wake up By the way, you heard a lot. We had fantastic. Did we have? Are we having fantastic?
Yes.
Tourist guys, can you just? Yeah, they are fantastic. I really enjoyed out there, etc. You saw the Temple of Zeus, Asclepius. There was constant smoke rising here, from the morning to the evening. You could walk there among the people, and you will hear the stories. Where are you from? I'm from that part of the Roman Empire. Why are you here? I just want to tell you, I had serious illness. I came here. I went to the Asclepion there. I always forget where Asclepion is now. Our Attila, he actually showed to us where Asclepion is again. And I spent here a significant amount of time. I prayed to the God. He really healed me. You see, now I'm healthy. So why are you here? I want to bring my sacrifices to Asclepius here. Not only that, I want to bring very expensive gifts there to the temple. Friends, there are expensive things here in this place. Always donations, gifts of the people who somehow found Savior God. Can you imagine that? These are the people you try to reach for Jesus Christ. There was life here. There was so much. We Christians, just one sect there. Just you have to imagine what it meant to be the first Christian. How would you relate to that? I explained in my bus. I believe that this trip will also change in your mind the concept of religion. When we use today the word religion, what do we mean? Come on. You don't have a relationship with God. You're not religious. Come to know God. When you come to God, it will reflect in your character. You'll become different person. Huh? You'll be a loving person. But in first century, religion was completely different concept. Religion had nothing to do with your character, with your habits. If you're a religious person, doesn't mean that you will be better husband, better neighbor. It has nothing to do with that. It means they are gods. They're in control of everything that is taking place around you. They control harvest, they control water, they control business, they control everything. But what I'm saying to you, it's not only about Pergamon. You will see it's about every church, about every place where the church was located. So all of these area of life had God's protectors. If you're a religious person, the Latin word religio simply means a relation. If you're religious, it means that you are in good relationship with those gods. You offer them sacrifices, you don't make them angry, and that's how they will provide everything for your needs. That's what meant religion. Religion had nothing to do with morality, with your character. Are you still with me? To make you to be a better person. That's actually what Stoics philosophy actually did for people. Philosophers were teaching people all those virtues. Religion was simply to keep good relationships with those gods. How do you do it? Every year, pagans, they had festivals. Here, in this area, they had festivals in honor of local gods. So many times I hear pastors are preaching from the pulpit how Christians were persecuted because they worship Jesus Christ. Unfortunately, I hope that concept will be changed during this trip. If you lived in the Roman Empire, you can worship any god you want. You had full freedom. Nobody had a problem that you worship Jesus Christ. Under what condition? That you at the same time worship and pay attention more to local deities. You see, we today use the word atheist. Who is atheist? The person who does not believe in higher power. But in Roman Empire, you were atheist if you don't follow and worship and honor the local deities. Okay? And Christians were not persecuted for worshiping Jesus Christ. They were persecuted for not honoring, worshiping, and following the local deities. So once a year, pagans in this temple, for instance, they would have special festivals. At those festivals, they will offer numerous sacrifices. Plenty of food. They had excellent potluck. I'm talking to Americans, huh? They had excellent potlucks. The food was put, plenty of food. And the priest would appear by killing a bull, a number of animals, and taking the blood of that bull and going to sprinkle that food in honor of that local god. They would eat, they would drink, they would celebrate, and very often those festivals were concluded with sexual immorality in honor of those gods.
Wow.
Okay? What about Christians?
Come on.
I believe I don't need to talk about that. They knew if they wanted to be faithful to God, they couldn't participate at those events. And there are serious consequences. You will see, especially when we come to Ephesus, and also probably it can be shown here. We saw the temple of Chran there. Do you see that? They will build the temples, and it was a civic duty, all citizens, at certain times of the year, to come there in the temple and to claim their loyalty to the emperor, even to offer in some cities, to offer some grain of incense there, okay, before the emperor. In some places, they even asked to say, Caesar is God. And Christians could not participate in that. But then something happened. You see, if you don't do it, what happens to you? I don't need to explain. And Christians were very faithful to God. Do you remember what we read about the message to the church in Ephesus? You have started to losing your first love. That was something that is taking place among the Christians. And most likely, the people who introduced the problems, Christians who introduced problems, were rich people. Poor people, they had nothing much to lose. But rich people, yes, they had. When there is persecution, Romans just eager to put you to death and to confiscate your property. You know his place. And then John came to Patmos. You know what happened when pastor is not present with his congregations? Who is taking control over those churches? The most powerful people. And since Christians were suffering occasionally, friends, sometimes we exaggerate talking about persecutions during that period. But more or less, in certain areas, they really suffered because of not participating with pagans in their activities. And suddenly, in certain churches, some individuals stood up and they said, come on, friends. Didn't even Paul, I'm exaggerating, didn't even Paul say that idol is nothing? What's the difference between the food that we eat there in honor of those gods and the food that we eat at home? Does the taste look different? What's the problem? We are not going there to worshiping God simply to be with those pagans. They're not persecute us. Okay? You have a letter to the church in Ephesus, will be in Ephesus. Ephesus is very faithful church, cannot tolerate false teachers, and says even they hate the deeds of the Nicolaitans. Who are Nicolaitans? We don't know too much about them, but the church father Irenaeus is telling us they were the followers of one of the 7 deacons. You remember the book of Acts chapter 6, one of the 7 deacons who really went to heresy. And his followers advocated the idea there was nothing wrong in Christians to participate with pagans in order to reach them. They're not denying Christ, but they're coming much closer to pagans. But the church in Ephesus was very faithful, did not allow those teachers to mess up in the church. But now we are coming here to the third letter, which was the letter to the church in Pergamon. Now, please, let's read this letter. I believe now everything will make sense in the light of what we just said.
the angel of the church in Pergamon write, these are the words of him who has the sharp double-edged sword. I know where you live, where Satan has his throne, yet you remain true to my name. You did not renounce your faith in me, not even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was put to death in your city where Satan lives. Nevertheless, I have a few things against you. There are some among you who hold to the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to entice the Israelites to sin, so that they ate food sacrificed to idols and committed sexual immorality. Likewise, you also have those who hold to the teaching of the Nicolaitans. Repent, therefore. Otherwise, I will soon come to you and will fight against them with the sword of my mouth. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who is victorious, I will give some of the hidden manna. I will also give that person a white stone with a new name written on it, known only to the one who receives it.
Thank you. He did a good job, huh? Yeah. I hope now, in the light of what I just said, what we read here, it gives you a little bit a sense what we are talking about. You will notice here, let me just repeat a few details. He said, these are the words of him who has the sharp double-edged sword. I know where you live, where Satan has his throne. It's a common acceptance that this throne of Satan was actually that shrine of Zeus there, the most influential object that really controlled the life of all people here on this hilltop, and also the people there in the valley. Okay, he says, yet you remain true to my name. You did not renounce your faith in me, not even the days of Antipas, my faithful witness. By the way, the word witness is the Greek word martyros, which really means martyr. But among the early Christians, the word martyr became also the word for witness, because when you witness, you go through martyrdom. When you go through martyrdom, it's because of witness that you are carrying on behalf of Christ. Okay? Do you see that? There was a persecution. There are even some people who had to go through martyrdom. And in the light of that, we have to read what is here next. It says, nevertheless, I have few things against you. And what was that? Number one, there are some among you who hold the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to entice the Israelites to sin. So they ate what? The food sacrificed to idols and committed sexual immorality. You remember what he talked about that? That was the main issue here among the Christians. Because of those two things, they could not participate in pagan festivals. But some influential people, we see Jesus through John calls them Balaamites. You know Balaam and Balak? I'm talking to pastors, I don't need to repeat that. Okay, they were behaving in the same way, trying to promote the things that Balaam centuries earlier did, enticing the people of Israel into apostasy. Okay, but there is also another group that is mentioned here, Nicolaitans, who couldn't find their way in the church in Ephesus. But you see here in Pergamon, they found a stronghold here in the church. Now you know what the problem was here. And that's the reason the message to church in Pergamon was actually suffering. The church was divided into two groups. Those who said no, decisive no, and those said, why not? John was not there. He was on Patmos. He could not provide the guidance. And that's why on that Lord's Day, Jesus came to visit John on Patmos, to give him messages for those congregations in Asia Minor. Okay? So this is about the church Pergamon. I'm sorry, I'm not repeating what I lectured before. I sent even to you material. You have excellent booklet that you received about informations. We have excellent tourist guide. I just want to tell you, excellent tourist guide. They provide us information, but we want to find out. We say, so we are here, so what? We want to go back. What shall we do with our tour? I just want to tell you, I believe that your preaching will not be the same any longer in light of that. So please, in order to have that effective and the right approach to the messages to the seven churches. Actually, I'm the first one of Seventh-day Adventist Church who suggested 3 applications. Okay? Number one, the way how we did it. Just try to see how those messages apply to different period in history. But then we do not know what to do. When we read verse 11 of chapter 1, that Jesus said to John, John, write all these things in the book and send to those congregations in Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamon, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. Send to them. We don't know what to do with that. By the way, if you go to chapter 22, Jesus repeats, John, I gave you those messages for those churches that are there. So when we are dealing with those 7 messages, we use the same hermeneutical approach as with the rest of the Bible. First, we have to find out what the text, what those messages meant to those Christians who lived in the Roman Empire in the 1st century in this territory, Asia Minor. I hope it makes sense. So I suggest that the first step in the understanding of those messages, I call them, it's the historical application. We have to put these 7 messages in the history of the 1st century to understand what those messages originally meant to those Christians. And I hope now, as we read this message, you could see it, how it really fits in everything what we're talking. It fits in the context of everything what we have seen today. Only after we understand what those messages meant to the Christians in the 1st century, we have now to understand also that the book of Revelation is a prophetic book. And I just want, friends, to tell you is those strong parallels between the context of those 7 messages in different periods in history, they cannot be just accidental. Evidently, that in those 7 messages, we have panoramic description of experience of God's people from the 1st century until the end of the world that will conclude with the second coming of Christ. So what we preached before, we have to put it in the right context. It was not wrong. It was not wrong. By the way how we preach, it really fits futuristic interpretation of Protestant evangelicals. That's not Seventh-day Adventist coming. If we do it, then really we are on the strong ground. So shall I one more time say, we have historical, then we have prophetic.
Okay.
But there is also a third one. And the third one was really favorite method of Ellen White. I learned that from her. I call it universal. By the way, I'm asking Green Bus, can you just zip?
Sure. Be quiet.
Because they know the answer. How many letters were sent to those churches? Now you are intimidated, I know what you will say. Yeah. Do you want me to open Seventh-day Adventist books? 7 letters to the churches. Friends, there are no 7 letters. Shall we go one more time to Revelation 1:11? Should we go one more time there? Jesus said to John, John, write in the book, meaning what you just heard from me. Write in the book or write on the scroll. How many scrolls? Just one. All the 7 messages were put on one scroll with the rest of the book of Revelation. And said, sent to Ephesus. When this scroll reached the church in Ephesus, how many messages did the church in Ephesus have to read?
7.
All 7. How does every message conclude? Whoever has ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches, not to the church. Every church had to hear all the 7 messages. Why? Not everybody in Ephesus was losing the first love.
Right.
Some were like Laodiceans. Cold, you could almost skate there in the church. Some were persecuted. So the message to the church in Smyrna really more related to them. Some were like people from Pergamon, Christians from Pergamon, already involved in apostasy. Are you still with me? Nobody could say, I'm sorry, this message does not apply to me. Yeah, does apply to you, this message. But look in some other messages, does it apply to you? So, all 7 messages were to be read by Ephesus. Smyrna, how many messages by Smyrna? You know already the answer. How many in Pergamon? You know already the answer. Friends, we have to be very careful because we try to label today every Christian as Laodicean. But you know very well it's not. I went to certain parts of the world, people are suffering so much for Christ, we come and beat them, we are Laodiceans, forgetting we are Laodiceans. We see 3 fingers are pointing toward me, but one toward them. And that's, we always like our problems to impose upon others. There are people in certain parts of the world, they are really persecuted, so the message to the church in Smyrna really applies to them. And there are Christians, they really live for missionary activities. The message to the church in Philadelphia, it really applies to them. We have to be very careful how we deal with the message to the 7 churches. In conclusion, how to do it. The messages to the 7 churches are not given to us that we point fingers to others. It's to study for ourselves and to ask, is there anything in those 7 messages? Do I belong to any of those 7 categories? And the message to every church is repent. What is repentance? You are going in the wrong direction. Hebrew word shuv, turn around and go back and establish your relationship with Jesus Christ. And I hope that this trip will not just be mental activities. I believe there is social activities. You will see me like never before. I'm joking, I have a fun here. I just want to, that's why we are here. But if this trip we come back and our preaching becomes the same, if our hearts are not transformed by these messages, by what we'll see, I'm sorry, friends, I feel my heart will be empty when I come back. So I hope the experience that we will have and every site that we will visit will really change our perspective of everything what we preach, especially these messages. Boy, I know in California, you will see now how many series in different churches will be messages to the 7 churches. So may God bless us. We have fantastic people, fantastic leadership, and I hope that we will have a great time.
All right, everybody come in real tight. We're going to take one picture.
In Philippi, the first baptized person in Europe was Lydia. She was from Thyatira. So many merchants from Thyatira were going all through the Roman Empire, okay, selling purple here from Thyatira. And there is theories why we don't have too much that survived. Because Thyatira, there are not too many significant buildings that could last too long, like in Ephesus, like in Pergamon, Laodicea, because this is really the city of workers. So not too significant. And this would explain why really not too many buildings survived up to today. You know, when you have workers, you don't have buildings that they build, to last for that aristocracy. Okay, so this would explain what the problem is. Let's see what was significant about that era. I have my reader here, and let's see the message that was sent.
To the angel of the church at Thyatira write, these are the words of the Son of God, whose eyes are like blazing fire and whose feet are like burnished bronze. I know your deeds, your love and faith, your service and perseverance, and that you are now doing more than you did at first. Nevertheless, I have this against you. You tolerate that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophet. By her teaching, she misleads my servants into sexual immorality and the eating of food sacrificed to idols. I have given her time to repent of her immorality, but she is unwilling. So I will cast her on a bed of suffering, and I will make those who commit adultery with her suffer intensely, unless they repent of her ways. I will strike her children dead. Then all the churches will know that I am he who searches the hearts and minds, and I will repay each of you according to your deeds. Now I say to the rest of you at Thyatira, to you who do not hold to her teaching, and have not learned Satan's so-called deep secrets. I will not impose any other burden on you, except to hold on to what you have until I come. To the one who is victorious and does my will to the end, I will give authority over the nations. That one will rule them with an iron scepter and will dash them to pieces like pottery. Just as I have received authority from my Father, I will also give that one the morning star. Whoever has ears, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches.
Thank you so much. By the way, I believe that I will have a time one on Sabbath we need to talk about that. I don't insist on that we talk a little bit about the messages, how they were organized. That's very nice section and the topic to deal with reference to the seven churches. But you will notice that the message to the church in Thyatira come at the center of the seven messages, and it's as twice long as any other messages. They stand to the center, and it's very long. What was the problem? There is one common problem here, but it's different by proponents and those who are pushing that issue in the church. You saw in Pergamon, we had Nicolaitans, we had Balaamites. But this was not case in Thyatira. Probably those false teachers were also here in Thyatira. But the most prominent was one woman, Christian woman in the church. We don't know her name. Jesus, through John, calls her Jezebel. And I believe we are pastors, we know who Jezebel was, why he called her Jezebel. What Jezebel did in ancient Israel, a promoter of Baal and Baal's worship there, this woman promoted the same idea as Nicolaitans and Balaamites. But she was much more successful. Why? Because she claimed to have prophetic gifts. She stood in the church. She had a special message from God, telling those fanatics in the church, viruses resisting to go to participate in worship. And you will see the issue is the same like in Pergamon. What was that? To eat food sacrificed to idols and participate in sacred sexual immorality. So her success was great. By the way, you know in America, preachers want to promote something. God spoke. I have special message from God. That's actually exactly what she was doing. She claimed to have a prophetic gift. God spoke to her, and she tried to promote that idea that there was nothing wrong with the Christians to go to participate in those pagan festivals. By the way, we don't have a time to provide exegetical analysis of the text. I see that most of you are having my writings there. I'm providing systematic exegetical explanation because the language of the judgment with reference to that woman is very strange to us today. But from the Semitic point, it was very regular and very normal language. And the language that is used is derived from the Old Testament. As judgment was pronounced very often by God's prophets in the Old Testament against false prophets, so also this woman who claimed to have a prophetic gift would have the same consequences as a prophetess in the Old Testament. So what was really, just a few minutes and then finishing, what were really the basic problem in the church that we have? One more time, keep in mind, we are talking about workers. Okay? We know, we have ancient sources that confirm it, what happened here in Thyatira. If you wanted to work, you have to belong to a guild. What will be another expression in English language? It's associations. So union. So each can we say the work yeah, they would have their guild. So if you want to work, number one, if you are an ordinary worker, you have to belong to the guild. Or if you are the owner of special industry, you have to belong to guild. And like in everything else, those guilds, they had God's protectors. So you have to be in guild. Why? Because if you come into disagreement, in conflict with those gods, what will happen to your business? Your business would fail. So those guilds, we know with certainty, from time to time, they would have a festival, they will have feasts, they will have very significant meetings where they would sacrifice those sacrifices to those gods, participating at those meals. So the same practice, but for different purposes, quite different than what we have in Pergamon. And I understand the problems of the Christians who were really the working class. You don't belong to the guild? You don't have green card? No work. It really created a serious issue that caused persecution, that caused many bad things for the Christians here in Thyatira. And on the top of that, there is a very prominent woman comes to the church and says, there is nothing wrong with that. God does not want you to be poor. God does not want you to suffer. Just go and participate there. And really created very sharp contrast between those who were following God and John, and he sent the message to them, and those really who decided to participate in those pagan festivals. And what we see here from the message, that this message comes at the center of 7 messages, that the church was really out. The church was very much divided and split over the issue, how really to relate to the pagan environment, and how really to respond to this challenge in order to get permit, in order to have a business, to govern business, or to really be employed and to make for your everyday life. What was the response from John? No compromise. Of course, one more time, just finish the final thought. Is keep in mind, not everybody had that issue, but they had to read all the 7 messages. So remember what we said, because those who did not face that problem in Thyatira, they had some other problems. So they had to hear also 7 other messages. I was running as fast as I could. My heavy accent even makes more difficulty to understand when I had to run. But at least we could experience what was going on. The location here at Thyatira was perfect for industry, special textile industry here. This territory here, and also Phrygia, with the main city of Laodicea, they were known for textile industry, well known to the leaders in Rome. So they try really to protect the city and everything. So understand it, if you don't follow the rules, you get into many serious troubles. So in that context, when you read the message to the church of Thyatira, okay, keep that in mind, and you will see how Jesus, through John, responded to the issues in the church, and what was that Jesus urged to Christians in this city. Okay. Any religion, any God that is okay for you, you can simply preach. You see, so many times people are making statement, Christians were persecuted because they worship Jesus Christ. I believe that this trip will a little bit change sometimes even statements that we are making from the pulpit. In the Roman Empire, nobody was persecuted by worshiping certain deities. Nobody was worshipped. You could worship Jesus Christ without any problem, under the condition that you also respect the local deities. Local deities in the Roman Empire were very much important. They were protectors of harvest, the protectors of rain, the protectors of everything. So, for instance, famine comes. The first thing that pagans will ask, why are gods so angry with us? They're offering sacrifices. They had annual feasts and celebrations dedicated to those gods, just to appease those gods, to be in good relationship with them, so they will bless them with the harvest, bless them with the rain, bless them with the cattle, bless them with everything. So when the trouble comes and hits certain areas, the first thing they will ask, why are God's angry? And they will just look for scapegoats. And who were scapegoats? Those who did not participate at those festivals, those who did not participate in eating the meat sacrificed to idols. So as you are reading the messages to the 7 churches, you will notice something. We will be in Ephesus. Ephesus is modern Seljuk, okay? You will see that it says that the Christians in Ephesus did not tolerate Nicolaitans. They're mentioned here. The question is, who are Nicolaitans? Nicolaitans were heretical group who lived toward the end of the 1st century and the beginning of the 2nd century. We have Church Father Irenaeus talks a lot about them. Most likely they were the followers of that one of the 7 deacons, Nicholas, that is mentioned in the book of Acts, chapter 7. And they were really the heretical group advocating the idea that Christians should go and participate with the pagans at their festivals, the activities with reference to their gods. Of course, Christians refused to do it. And in Ephesus, that heretical group did not have any success. But in Pergamon, they were very successful. John calls them Nicolaitans, and he calls them the followers of Balaam. We are pastors, we know why Balaam, okay? What Balaam did in the Old Testament, okay? That's what those people were doing there in Pergamon. So that was the main problem for Christians, how to relate to the pagan environment. And of course, the Christians were split. The believers were split in those churches. The problem was that John was on Patmos. He could not provide the leadership. And that's from Patmos he wrote those. I have to be careful, please now. I hear so many times pastors are preaching about 7 letters to the churches. 7 letters. There are no 7 letters. Only 1 letter. If you go chapter 1 verse 11, what does it say? Jesus said to John, write on a scroll, single scroll, and send to the churches. And there is Ephesus, there is Smyrna, there is Pergamon, there is Thyatira, there is Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. So that was 1 letter, 1 scroll came to Ephesus. How many of those messages did the church in Ephesus have to read? All 7. Because not everybody in Ephesus was Ephesian, meaning losing the first love. Some were persecuted, some were like Laodiceans. So they had to read all the 7. That's why every letter concludes with the call, whoever has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches, not to the church. So I'm sorry, I will always give you some nudges with regard to that. We have to correct it. Today, not everybody is Laodicean. We have to keep it in mind. That's why we need all those 7 messages. So we have first to find, and get the answer why that particular message was sent to that particular church, and what were the issues, what are the problems among those Christians. Once we understand it, that the content of each of those 7 messages really makes the full sense, and that's why we are here for. We are here for. And we have a fantastic person, boy. He will give us many things that. Yes. What particular message meant to the church? Okay. The next one is, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we don't know how many churches were what we call today Asia Minor. We know that there was church in Miletus, It's mentioned in the book of Acts that Paul visited with the church elders at the end of the third missionary journey. There was a church in Colossae. You will see, we'll be in Laodicea. We will see the ruins of Colossae. I don't know how many, about 10 miles, maybe even less.
From Hierapolis, about 20 miles.
20 miles. You will see Hierapolis from Laodicea, just maybe 3-4 miles. There were churches very, very close. And of course, Troas. Some people suggest 3-4 more churches. It could be 20 and plus churches. The question is, why only 7 are chosen? Most likely, the purpose was to show different experience of Christians, you know, in different periods of history. So we call it I call it prophetic, okay? And number 3 is universal. It means that all the 7 messages could apply at the same time in different parts. For instance, in one conference, you can have different churches that they reflect those messages. In one union, you can say different conferences. In one division, different unions. And we are talking about worldwide church. In different divisions, they can reflect it at the same time. By the way, this was the favorite method of interpretation of the 7 churches of Ellen White. So that's why we are here. We are here in this place just to understand about those messages and how they were relevant to the Christians, you know, in the first century at the time when the book of Revelation was written and sent to them.
Write only one side, not the other side, not the back side. But on the pergament, you can use both sides. And you can, store them one above each other very easily, rather than scrolls. It takes less, volume, and it's easier to protect from humidity and from other, things which can give harm to those records there. So, Pergamon's library, for a while, just before the transportation of books, it was over 250,000. But the main reason why they lost most of the collection was the love between Mark Antony and Cleopatra. Because when Alexandria was destroyed and burned during the Caesar's campaigns, then Mark Antony took most part of those books, scrolls in Pergamon, and gave it to Cleopatra, back to Egypt.
So they started to use, as Mr. Attila said, they used also on the back to write. And finally, they noticed, the columns, they were written in columns, okay. The Christians noticed, what if we cut it? It was because of copying of the Holy Scriptures, okay, all the New Testament. Okay, they said, hey, so many times when we talk, only Christians were going to the church with their Bibles. If you wanted to have your Bible with you, you needed a donkey. Just imagine 66 scrolls to carry. How much? You needed a truck, what we would say in our modern terms. So finally they realized the scroll was not a convenient way. I'm talking about Christians. Christians started using a new format of books, which is known codex. So they cut the scroll, okay, and they put those leaves, they connected them together. So finally we got codex, which we call today, it's a book format of the books. And somehow it is really related to the library of Pergamon. So we are coming really to the very important sides. Deities and gods. So the whole religion in the Greco-Roman world was to be in peace with gods. If you don't follow the local deities, then you were atheist. Today, who is atheist does not believe in God at all. But in the Roman Empire, Christians were atheists because they did not honor the local deities. So in the Roman Empire, you could worship any god. And people were moving from place to place, especially slavery. You know, slaves would bring the local gods. Romans did not have problem with that. As long as you respect and you honor and you participate in those festivals, honoring those local deities. So we have to keep, you know, in mind so many times the way how we are defining religion, because religion in Greco-Roman Empire had nothing to do with morality, nothing had to do with one's character. It simply meant it was intended to be in good relationship with God, so they will not get angry, and you know they will bless you. But it was those philosophical movements, Stoicism in particular, that they took care of morality and building the character, etc. So it was completely separated, from each other. On the main highway or the roads that really connected those 7 congregations. So if you started, with Ephesus, you would go there north. You go to Smyrna, you go to Pergamon, then you go east, you go to Thyatira, and then you go south, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea, and then you come back to Ephesus. It's still very, very popular the way that because of that. There are also some other suggestions, but probably this is number one suggestion that it is held. Readers of the letter, Paul's letter to Galatians, is there is so-called Northern Galatian theory and Southern Galatian theory. Some people think when Paul wrote Galatians that he wrote to this native province of Galatia. They were really descendants of Gauls. They came from France. They moved here. But Southern Galatian theory is that actually Paul wrote to the whole region, which was the Roman province of Galatia, which makes sense because Paul established all these churches here in this area during the first missionary journey. So really, he began what we are interested very much with the New Testament era. But let me tell you, you are in a country that has a long history that goes much before Europe or anything. Ancient Hittite Empire actually started here. There is museum here, still from the capital of ancient Hittite Empire. As I was writing my doctoral dissertation, I had to go to search ancient seals, that thousand ancient seals from the time of Abraham, and it's this country has a long history, believe me. That Paul, when he became Christian, he tried to come close to the Christians. They did not trust him. Many Christians in Jerusalem, they had their relatives, they suffered because of persecution initiated by Paul. So Paul became disappointed. So he went, according to him, spent 3 years in Arabian desert there by himself. Okay, we know that for certain. But following that how do you say that, retreat to Arabia, Paul disappeared from the scene for about 10 years. We don't know what happened during the time. There are many suggestions that Paul went to Tarsus, where he went to study there at university, because Tarsus had one of the most prestigious universities. That's how he was very much trained in paganism. He could quote pagan sources, but we know that he was in Tarsus. If you remember when Christianity, Mr. Attila mentioned in Antioch, when the conversion of Gentiles, it started with Antioch of Syria, is finally they needed the help, and Barnabas came to help there. And Barnabas worked with the church, but Barnabas realized he needed somebody who was very much fluent in paganism, and he was very much Jewish. and he remembered Paul or Saul, so he went to Tarsus and he was looking for him. He invested time looking for Paul to find him in Tarsus. He brought him from Tarsus back to Antioch there, and during that 1 year as they worked together, finally the Christians got the name Christians. It means the followers of Jesus Christ. So Turkey has a really very, very long history. By the way, when I was over bring my
here, and then there were two rivers, a very fertile land, and a mild climate, and a steep hill to defend themselves easily in case of emergency. So those made that they have chosen this area. But the story is quite interesting because there are settlements here since Bronze Ages. There are some early burial places from 900, 800 BC. There are some burial places from late Bronze Age as well. There are some artificial mounds on the fertile plain, which are, artists, mosaic layers, sculptures, architects. So a new sort of Hellenistic culture and art developed here. It is said that if there were 8, wonders of the world in the antique world, one of them should be that Zeus altar there. It was so, big and monumental. 40 feet high, can you imagine? 40 feet high. And 120 meters around it, there were the friezes, reliefs of the Olympian gods and goddesses against the giants. Titans and giants.
And that's what's in Germany now?
And you see, all those reliefs were built, carved like statues, because those reliefs were not very smooth ones. Almost 2/3 of the figure was outside the wall, like a statue. That makes it so beautiful and, essential.
Is that the one that's in Berlin?
Yes,
now?
in Berlin. Stone by stone it was carried, and it is a very interesting story, which I will tell when we go there. Okay.
I believe if the altar is here, the whole area would go to significance. You will have such tourism here. Would you only tell us, here we had the temple of Asclepius. Where was Asclepion?
We will see from the top. Behind, it's there in that direction, behind the trees. We will see little further after.
I don't know if you are familiar with the word Asclepion. Asclepion was the place, like we would say, hospital, where people would come, spend significant amount of time. They provided healing therapies for them and everything, temple to pray to God every day. So that's known as Asclepion. It's down. It was not located here in this area.
Adopt the snake or the serpent.
Asclepion was a snake.
Okay.
I don't know.
On this gate, you can see in Berlin, Pergamon Museum now as well. And there was an inscription right above. It was written as, carved as, Basileus Eumenes, Nikepheroi Athenai. Victory bringing Athena, to whom it's dedicated by Eumenes, the Pergamon king. And this area was colonnaded from all sides, as you see, with marble columns. And there was a 2-story building on the right side. And just behind the stories there was the famous library of Pergamon. And just behind the tree there, you can see the foundation stones of the temple dedicated for Athena, which had 10 columns on the long sides and 6 columns on the short side. And it was built in a peripteral style, I mean 1-line columns around the rectangular building. We will go there as well. But let's go first to the Trajan temple and then go down and come here. And I think we will have a preaching where we have the Trajanus temple. So let's go through the Eumenes the first, and then Attalos the first, Eumenes the second, Attalos the second, Attalos the third's palaces were all here on the right side. Each palace had a courtyard, and it had minimum 4 to 7 rooms. The upper floors were for the bedrooms, The entrance floors were for the daily life, kitchen, and working places as well. And in those courtyards, all floors were paved with mosaics. Even the artist's names were written on them as well. So those were the palace section in the Acropolis here on the right side. And the famous library was there. By the way, on the right side, there was one of the sisters that was after Alexandria. But it's ruined, as you see, because of wars, because of the earthquake, and the ingredients were already carried and transported to Egypt by Mark Antony, as I said. Cleopatra visited Pergamon as well. Still, there is a place not far from here where we have a spa, thermal water spring, which is called Cleopatra Springs. And that was an interesting library because it was long earlier than Ephesus, later than Alexandria, but earlier than Ephesus. Because Ephesus library, which is very beautiful, restored, and it is impressive indeed. When we go there, you will see. But it was built during Roman era, at the beginning of 2nd century AD. This was from 2nd century BC, some 330 years before the library in Ephesus. So for the first time when they built here, they built a reading room. Very interesting reading room. And the books, or the scrolls, let's say, they were in the shelves, and those shelves were from 30 to 50 centimeters apart from the walls to protect them from humidity and dust there. And at the reading room, at the center of it, there was a statue of Athena, the goddess in those days of wisdom. And that statue here was from 2nd century before Christ, but it was a copy of the original one at Parthenon in Athens. Phidias, the famous sculptor, made the most beautiful Athena statue there at Parthenon, and that was the copy of it. And the statue from here you can see in Berlin in the same museum as he mentioned before as well. You see those holes on the right hand side were to keep the shelves apart 30 centimeters, 40 centimeters apart from the walls over there. Indeed, it was covered with a roof, so protected from sunlight and rain and cold weather as well. So, and it was just close and next to the sacred square where people had their meetings during the religious, meetings or feasts or festivals as well. And when you look there, you see there's a white panel there, and you see a rectangular wall. That rectangular wall was the stylobat, or the foundation wall of the Temple of Athena there. On the long sides, there were 10 columns. On the short sides, there were 6, basalt columns in Dorian style. Those pieces of the columns are spread there, as you see, over there.
What is the stylobat?
Stylobat is the foundation, walls.
Foundation walls.
The basement walls of the building.
So if this was here and the palaces were here, was this the main road?
One of the
central
main
road
roads, yes.
that we're walking on?
The manuscripts that went to Egypt, are they still there? Did they survive? The manuscripts,
Yes, they were found many.
they're still there.
Yeah.
But some of them
Parchments, inscriptions on, rather than parchments, because many of them were carried to Egypt. But some parchments and mostly inscriptions on stone.
I see, and they all
Discovered.
survived,
Tablets and inscriptions on
but
stones
they
are
were
discovered.
originally here. And then Cleopatra, what did she do with the ones that were gifted to her from Mark Antony?
Well, it was
happened to
destroyed
those?
afterwards, brought first to
Okay.
Egypt and destroyed afterwards.
I see.
Many of them were actually brought by Arabs to Baghdad because in the so-called Muslim Gold Era, which is from 8th to 11th centuries AD, where there were some Muslim philosophers, like the Greek philosophers in the past, questioning even the existence of God. in Arabic world, in those days, they could question those. And they built a huge, the largest library in Baghdad. So some of them were brought down to Baghdad, or the others were translated to Arabic. And then in that way, the Western world became aware of those, sketches and, writings as well.
Yeah, okay.
Unfortunately, the library in Baghdad was destroyed by Mongols. The grandson of Genghis Khan, yes, burned down the library.
And Attila, we will see another much smaller library in Ephesus.
Much
Celsius. Yeah.
smaller
Much
than
smaller,
the contents, but much bigger as a
Much
building.
bigger.
Building size is much bigger.
So it's just
A little bit later, they
Yes, it is from Roman era, about nearly 300 years later than this.
Can we know where is the library
entrance?
There was the entrance from that side over there, and you see the white panel there. There are steps going down to the theater. The theater is there as well. So imagine the theater activities, people coming there, to see the tragedias or comedias or whatever. Or sometimes, well, theaters were not only for shows or performances, even philosophers were giving speeches there. St. Paul, for example, gave speeches there in the Ephesus theater. So, and after that, this is the sacred area there, so those who like to read something could come here. Those who like to give their donations could give there, and then they could have their festivities here around, and then go down to the lower city, back home.
Attila,
Yes, sir.
did they have here Jewish?
Taken to Babylonia, and the temple was destroyed as well. But then, temple was restored in different times, different periods, partially actually. And the first, the emperor, Persian emperor actually he was, who let Jews to return back to Jerusalem was Xerxes, the famous, Persian ruler. And then some of them could go back to Jerusalem, but many during that exile spread to the other countries. They came to Ionia because Ionia here had a golden era at that time. The culture was flourishing, architecture was flourishing, banking was flourishing. So for trade, Jews were almost experts on this, for generations actually. They were doing even banking in Babylonia, as we know. So perhaps, it is in their genes that, they know very well trade, commerce, and also some production. Like most of the dyers, wool dyers, tent makers, for example, Saul was a tent maker, Paul was a tent maker. Most of those textile makers, dyers, they were from Jewish origin.
And he was working that in Corinth, in Greece. It appears that Pax Romana, created by Augustus, really created good opportunity for everybody to travel, and especially Jews. By the way, in the 1st century, in the Roman Empire, population was 55 million. 4.5 million were Jews. So, can we say about 80% of population in Roman Empire were Jews. Only 1 million lived in Palestine. 3.5 million of Jews, they lived outside of Palestine, which is very, very significant. That's why when Paul preached the gospel, Paul was always looking for synagogue. The only exception you will see will be in Lydia, because, in Philippi. In Philippi, Philippi was a Roman colony for Roman soldiers who were retired, so they were not allowed to build synagogue there. That's why Paul went there at the river when the Jews were worshiping there, and he found Lydia and baptized her. But Paul was always looking for a synagogue where he would preach the gospel there. So 3.5 million of Jews really lived outside of Palestine, which is very significant factor.
They didn't have the influence of the temple there.
No. After the destruction of Jerusalem, temple lost any significance and meaning in Jewish theology. They focused on synagogues.
That's why synagogues gained importance actually, because there were no other places. The temple was not existing anymore.
Babylonian return. That's when the Jews came here.
Actually, synagogues became with Ezra.
With Ezra.
Ezra, they established, they said you don't need to go to Jerusalem to worship. Wherever there are at least 10 Jews, build a building, call it synagogue. Synagogue, it means gathering together. Okay. And they said you can worship God, you don't need to go to Jerusalem. Because the Jews were scattered,
You know, one of the largest synagogues ever built from the antique world, you're going to see at Sardis. Enormous synagogue.
I did not mention Sardis, yeah, it's important.
Was dedicated to Trajanus, the Roman emperor, who ruled between 98 and 117 AD, and succeeded by Hadrian from 117 to 138. Completed by Hadrian. This construction started by Trajanus and completed by Hadrian. It is not one of the biggest temples. You know, the biggest temple ever built in the antique world was the Artemis temple in Ephesus, which was one of the 7 wonders of the world, because the height of the building was from the basement to the top was 30 meters. 30 meters. And 127 columns were surrounding in double rows around the temple. I'm going to tell more about it when we arrive there. The second largest was at Samos, Hera temple. The third largest was at Turkey, Didyma, Apollon temple. This was a very medium, even small sized temple. But architecturally, the importance comes from that. You see, if you look at this figure, this is the natural topography of the hill here. And this is the basement of the temple. As you see the columns there. Due to the elevation here, they had to build 3 stories of walls, which makes 23 meters vertical height to carry the weight of the temple above, which was about more than 5,000 tons. So that's why it is important. I mean, from the engineering point of view, it was a very skillful engineering result made out of the Roman engineers and builders. In those days, they were not calling architects to architects. You know, they were calling mechanikoi from Greek, like mechanical engineers. Architect came afterwards. It was not used in those days. They had their, tools, wheels, ropes to lift up heavy items, and they had their, methods developed from the ancient Greek times onward. First started from Ionia actually, and then passed to Greece, and then spread all over, all those engineering methods. So they built this temple on the artificial elevation of the hill, which makes 23 meters depth to this side over there, to the seaside over there.
Attila, can I
Yes.
just mention here, this is not related to this trip, but Herod the Great, he was very much Hellenized. He knew the Roman building projects. That's the way how he arranged for the Temple Mount. How many of you were in Jerusalem? You see, you have flat area, but actually flat area because what he did, it was on the mount, and that's what he did actually. It's the same that you have here. Just to give you insights from, I know it's other areas, but just that you are aware what we have it. I mean, they were genius what they were doing.
genius.
Actually, this was an accumulation of knowledge throughout centuries.
Yeah.
All cultures or nations, let's say, in the beginning there were no nations, almost, isn't it? But people created something somewhere, and some people learned and built above. Some other people took the new product and kept and added some above. So all this culture and civilizations actually, improved by time in that way. They influenced each other.
These are the columns of the temple?
Sorry? This is the Triumph's temple. And this was a portico with columns over there to the other side. looking to the palaces of the kings.
What were the roof made of before?
Indeed, bricks, brick roof, a wooden structure up above, and above it the bricks, tiny bricks. Yes.
Oh, heavy.
They're quite heavy indeed. That's why it doesn't exist now.
That's why it easily goes.
Green bus.
Is this were those plains fertile lands before for agriculture?
That was the town where the ordinary people were living in the Roman ages.
What about those?
Yeah, this was the fertile agricultural area,
Okay.
fields there.
But now,
Now-
agriculture is substituted by
Se-
settlement.
Yes, some
Somehow,
part of it.
somehow.
Some part of it.
The green bus, could you come over here, please?
Oh, that's where the.
There, which could be built temporarily. You see some down there. By using timber structural parts passing through the holes there, they could easily build a stage there if necessary. If not, no. But at the bottom, to the right side, you can't see from here, but later you will see, on the right side, there was a small temple, a marble one, dedicated to Dionysos, who was the god for grapes, wine production, fertility, etc., and for festivities too. And from Dionysos temple, you see there's a road, 250 meters in length, that was reaching down to the agora, marketplace of the medium city or the medium level city there. So that was a very lively point of the city in those days. And there are 80, lines of seats looking down to stage over there. 10,000 people could sit, but the elevation is 37 degrees, which makes it the steepest theater. I will tell more about theaters. Why the agora was the marketplace.
What was the degree of
37 degrees.
37 degrees.
But you probably are familiar with that. When those actors are playing, even whispering, everybody could hear.
Yeah.
The acoustic was such great that even
Yeah.
today,
Yeah,
nobody can understand how they were able to do it.
Which one?
Everybody can see.
They did not have microphone on anything,
No.
but
You see,
you could
there
hear
are-
everything.
when we say theater, all those started with some religious rituals and festivities as well. From the old times, in different cultures as well. There were festivities in Egypt, there were festivities in all Israeli people as well. They were singing, and the Greek theater has its origins in mythological festivals actually. Pan, for example, the satyrs, etc. Their dances, inspired people to have theaters and performances as well. Why they built so big theaters, why they spend so much money for such theater. This is a small one, but there are big monumental ones that we're going to see in Ephesus, for example. Because it was not only a place for theater performances, it was a place for parliament.
Parliament.
That was the parliament building. Demos, people were gathering here to give decisions.
Politics.
The second was a performance center for tragedia, for musical concerts as well. When there were performances, even the prisoners were brought there. They were not let to sit. They had to stand, but watch the game to learn some norms of ethics and life as well. And the third purpose, when it was not used as a concert hall or a performance site, then philosophers or theologians, they were giving lectures here in those theaters.
Especially traveling preachers would come and they would bring.
It's a kind of educational center.
Yes.
When was this built?
This was built 2nd century before Christ, during the Renaissance. during the end of the Hellenistic period, just before the Romans. The Roman theaters were mostly built on walls, artificial walls. The Greeks always used the topographical elevation, for the advantage of the lines of seats. And the Greek theater always have a nice panorama, as you see here. For Romans, it's not so important, but for Greeks, it was so important because mostly they had no stage buildings. They were building temporary stage buildings, and the panorama itself behind was a part of the decoration. And but the Romans, on the other hand, they always built stage buildings, even pro stages, and they always built walls down under the audience seats, and the stage building closed the panoramic view almost for 2/3 of the audience. They couldn't see the lower seats, but the acoustics improved a lot. The Roman theater has much better acoustics compared to Greek, theaters. But the Greek theater always has the dominant, point in the city, which has a nice view and panorama when you sit as an audience there.
Just one detail. You remember Paul in Ephesus? When that businessman was not happy with Paul's preaching, where did he bring people? And we will be there. Just one more detail. How people decide the number of population in city. You mentioned 10,000, so they count them 10 times. I don't know how archaeologists they establish it. So if Ephesus is 22,000, so they said 220,000 population was in Ephesus. That's the way how actually they decide how many people, what was the population of the city. So that's the reason is the common establishment.
For the established cities, that's in general is very correct, as Ranko said. But sometimes, if the city is a holy city, or if the city has very religious, importance in old days, then they could build bigger theaters than the population rate of the city, ratio of the city. For example, Hierapolis had never, population over 80,000, but the seats there is 8,000, bigger, because it was a sacred place, festivity place. There was the Plutonium, there was the Apollon's temple there, there was the thermal springs there, that you're gonna see later on.
And probably this explains uncertainty about Ephesus, because Ephesus had Pannonian Games, which are second after Olympic Games. So every year, many people come across the Roman Empire there, and that's the reason uncertainty really what was the population of Ephesus as a city,
Ephesus is estimated as its peak nearly 260,000.
Something like that, yeah.
Between 200 and 260,000, let's say. Just over there, that was the amphitheater, where there were gladiator fights, where there were even water plays, because they could bring water like Colosseum in Rome, and they could do performances in that amphitheater there. Still not excavated, probably there will come so many statues afterwards. I asked the German archaeology professor here one day, I said, how long time you need for the work to be completed here, I said. He told quite a long, he said, the budget, he said, and he said, at least 400 years, he said.
Oh. Come up there. You come.
1,000 tons. Marble is quite heavy, as you know. We have, by the way, in Turkey, we have almost 60% of the marble reserves of the world. We have 85 different types of marble in Turkey. Almost all colors, green, pink, white, black, purple and white. But we don't have plain purple. So as soon as you see a plain purple, column or a marble plate, those were all brought from the Red Sea quarries down there from the south. We don't have this. But at the moment, we have 60% of all marble, reserves in the world. White marble, 1 cubic meter, is about 3 to 3.2 tons in density. But the black marble is over 4 tons. When the color gets darker, the density increases. So it's quite heavy actually. To transport it is quite difficult, quite heavy, but has a long life. And that's why it was preferred in the antique world as construction material. But as it was so expensive, in general, when a building, a temple, a boulevardarium, and a building, official building, when it was not used anymore, or when it was banned, then people rushed, took the marble plates or stones and built different houses or temples afterwards with the same, material. In a way, they recycle. So, sir, the preaching shall it start now?
Yes, they will do that. No, just keep on, say whatever, I believe. They will invite us.
What will happen, for example, if this big earthquake come here? Do you think that this will destroy this?
Well, you see, in this top of the mountain here, and mostly it is basalt stones down here, the earthquake can't affect so much. Some sliding, some vibration, movement will happen.
Yeah, but
perhaps,
like this.
but it will not, destroy much.
So this was destroyed by Romans or?
During the wars, mostly.
Yeah.
And it takes sometimes storms, because it's open, to the sea. Although we don't have hurricanes, we can have storms. So, for example, none of those temples has roof buildings anymore, because they had wooden structures and bricks above. So they were all ruined with the timber. And many of the marble later on was, for example, during the Christian era, this temple was not sacred anymore. Even it was banned. So people took material in it. Of acanthus tree, acanthus leaf. And this is a typical Corinthian capital, column capital. A typical Roman, column with the volutes over there, and a beautiful acroteria at the corner there, and the reliefs on the top there, on the lines of the marble, stone lines there. But it was not a big temple. Ionic. Originally they were all Ionic in style, but due to an earthquake, those trees were fallen down, so replaced by Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, at late 2nd century AD, about 180 AD. So there was a library right here. Imagine patients could go into the library and get some books and read there. And one of the dishes.
Writing of these things, but we still have in English language Gallen instructions how to improve health and what to do. So.
And a beautiful bronze statue of Hadrian, the Roman emperor, was discovered in a niche there in the library. Now we keep it in the museum in Pergamon. So shortly I can tell you this, because otherwise we can be quite late. But please imagine hundreds of people with their life, dresses, with us, and then doctors, staff, analyzers, water there, people trying to breathe, people telling their problems to the doctors. It was a very active, treatment center at the same time. And there were 3 small temples behind that big tree, before the brown column alley there. One was dedicated to Apollo, the other was to Asclepios, and the third one to Hygeia, where we get the word hygiene. Yes, this is one of the two largest Asclepios centers in the world. No, after Hippocrates. Actually, Asclepios was before Hippocrates, but Hippocrates was a man who worked in Asclepion in Kos at the Greek. So the